Sitao Xu, thank you very much for coming to UNC Chapel Hill. Thank you very much for speaking to us in the Krasnoy event series. We all enjoyed your talk about the trade war between the United States and China. Let me ask you, who is at fault? Who began the trade war?
I don't think we should point fingers at this point. I mean, this thing just didn't fall from sky, right? I mean, it's really accumulation of many problem issues over a very long period of time.
Thank you. What are the main issues involved?
I think the main issue involved as such, first of all, I think for the West, United States included, it has been a struggle to develop so-called inclusive capitalist system, right? So it really boils down to the fact, how do you compensate those who did not benefit from free trade, the globalization? I don't think we have an answer yet. In general, we say we have higher taxes, job training. Those are, I don't think they are long-term solutions. That's number one. From China's side, for a very long time, I think policymakers have taken external demand for granted. Just no matter what we do, if we have a problem, they will go away simply because domestic demand, external demand will be so strong.
So the issues are, for example, reciprocity in market access, intellectual property theft, as the West often claims, both the Trump administration, many European countries, the purchase of Chinese companies with Western know-how potential. Do you think these grievances the West has are actually true and correct?
Some are true, some are untrue. To give you an example, very often you criticize Chinese companies for paying too much for some German firm or US. So are you saying they should pay too little instead of too much? So some of this criticism are not exactly consistent. Also, I think if you look at some of the relationship more rigorously, right? Think about if China didn't exist. If China didn't exist, do you think Western consumers won't have today's lifestyle and standard of living? And in economics, we often say there's global saving glut, right? Because Chinese is saving, and that bring down the cost of capital in the West. So, I mean, over the long run, it's not just this one-way relationship, right? It's a very entrenched relationship, but some of the recent economic hardship in many developed countries really have prompt people to ponder, really, how do we make capitalist system more inclusive? And for China, also soul search, because subsidies and all this used to be viewed as harmless, but now we have to look at that in a global context.
That's a good point. Market economic status is still contentious. The Chinese still claim it, while the West still denies it, and it's now in front of the WTO. So, and subsidies and the involvement of the Chinese state in the economy in a very large extent play a role. So, do you think China is a market economy at the moment, or not?
Okay, so before I say whether I think or not, right? And there are a few Western countries have recognized China as a market economy. I think Switzerland, Australia, New Zealand. Most European countries and North America, Japan, they have not done. I don't think they will do that. I think for China, it's a transition economy, right? But how do you define a true market economy? Is France a true market economy? Germany is true market economy. It's difficult to say. I don't think China can ever be like one of those Anglo-Saxon society. I think culturally, I think citizens, they always have certain expectations with the government. I think the government always behave like parents in certain way.
And that will not be overcome?
I think it's going to be very, very difficult. Even when we look at some of, not Chinese society, but countries where Chinese culture is dominant. For example, Singapore, right? Do you think Singapore is a true market economy? I'm asking you.
Mm-hmm. What is your expectation how the trade war can eventually be overcome?
My expectation is, in the short term, I think sanity would prevail, right? Simply because stakes are so huge. So there could be some suspension of, I would say, tensions or austerity. And I think China will open up market in area of financial service, commercial banks, rating agencies, credit card companies, asset management. Then I think the pressure may come back in the area of technology transfer, joint venture requirement, IPR protection. Those are long-term issues. So there will be back and forth. But in general, I do feel if there is meaningful market access progress, I think that will go a long way to mitigate potential tensions.
Okay. Do you see a general clash between the United States and China in a more geopolitical way? Is there a rivalry which goes much beyond the trade war and economic and market access issues, and can that ever be overcome?
There is a rivalry, but rivalries are not bad, right? We are in Chapel Hill. There's a rivalry between you and the Duke. Don't you think that's a pretty good rivalry in sports?
I'm not sure about that.
In sports and academic research, right? I think rivalry competition very often they bring a better part of yourself, whether it's a sports program, athletic program, or academic institution, even a country, right? You could have rivalries between Singapore, Hong Kong. You could have rivalries between Frankfurt and London. Nothing wrong with rivalry, but rivalry has to be healthy. I think for China, United States, some key global issues, they definitely need to work together. Climate change is one example. Korean Peninsula, that's another example. Nuclear arm proliferation, that's another example. And poverty reduction in Africa. No, we see rivalries there, right? I mean, I think U.S.
Can you imagine that the Trump administration and the Xi Jinping administration can actually cooperate on these issues you just mentioned?
They have to, because otherwise I think consequences will be very, very negative.
But do you see any indication from within the Chinese government, within the Chinese system, that that is feasible?
Well, let's go back to trade war. I think if some of these tensions being mitigated, and if the Chinese economy becomes more open, and if the U.S. can make some adjustment, I think we'll be. I think the relationship can move into a more healthy state.
Mm-hmm. So you're not seeing a long drawn-out geopolitical conflict between two big powers, one status quo power and a rising power, which is almost unavoidable?
I think for China, so far I don't see any ambitions in terms of territories, right? I don't see that. I also feel the existing system, which I think the existing system very much came from so-called Bretton Woods, after World War II. China has been benefiting from that, largely. So it's against China's own interest just to create a new system.
So you last but not least, you are an optimist that the geopolitical system and the economic system of the past will continue into the future?
I'm more sanguine than most people.
Thank you very much. That's good to know. Sitao Xu, thank you very much for coming to UNC Chapel Hill.
Thank you. Thank you for hosting me.
Absolutely.
Thank you.